Hello everybody, Calamity here with my last guide of 2023, or at least I recorded this in 2023. Today's video is going to be all about our favorite junior alchemist, Sucrose. She's available currently on the banner with Navia and Ayaka. And in this video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about her, from weapons, talents, artifacts, constellations, team setups, and some combat showcasing at the end. That's a lot to go over, so let's get started. Sucrose is a utility support character. She provides, support isn't always just healing, right? So she helps your team out by grouping enemies together, debuffing your enemies, as well as providing various buffs to your team. But let's start with her talents first and foremost. We got the normal attack here. She is a catalyst user, so all of her normal attacks do anemo damage and they cannot be converted into another element. She does have a sort of unique-ish charge attack where she does it's like almost like a funnel, AoE funnel anemo damaging attack after a short casting time. But other than that, all of her other attacks are pretty straightforward. Now, you might have noticed my talent levels are pretty low, or at least for the normal attack, because we don't need to really focus on it. You can if you want to later on, but when you're first building Sucrose, definitely your higher priorities are her elemental skill and burst. But even then, you don't have to invest in her talent levels too much because we're using her for the Ascension talent buffs. And more of a battery as well for her team, so you don't really need to up those at least at first if you don't have the materials to do so. But let's move on to the more interesting part of her kit, which is her elemental skill. It has a really long name. I'm just gonna call it Creation 6308. This is a very straightforward elemental skill. It does auto target opponents. You can't really control where Sucrose casts this skill. But it's going to do AoE anemo damage once again, and it's going to pull opponents and objects towards the center of where it's cast. So Sucrose is one of the best 4-star characters in my opinion, especially for newer players that don't have, characters like Venti or Kaza, because she helps you group up your enemies together to make it easier for your AoE damage dealers to get the most value, basically. And if you look at the skill attributes, again, there's a reason why we don't need to prioritize upgrading her talents too much here. It's just, when you level them up, it's just a little bit of skill damage increase, which is nice, but you don't have to get it up to a really high level to get the value from it. The grouping is already a good enough value from the skill, and it does have a cooldown of 15 seconds. Next up, we have her elemental burst, which is called Forbidden Creation Isomer 75/type 2. It's quite a name again. Also pretty straightforward. I love this character because she's so easy to explain. She's gonna throw a concoction that pulls enemies continuously. It's a better version of her elemental skill, and it will continue to pull them and deal anemo damage. So when the burst comes into contact with Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, it will absorb that type as well as deal additional damage based off the type that it absorbs. So it cannot absorb Geo, and it cannot absorb Dendro. This is unfortunate because Navia is on the banner with Sucrose, and these two unfortunately do not have any sort of, no pun intended here, but they lack chemistry. Literally, you can't use Geo and Anma together and expect some good elemental reaction to come out of it. It's unfortunate, it's just how it is. If you look at the skill attributes here, it does do damage over time, and then the additional damage when it absorbs an element lasts for 6 seconds. And has a cooldown of 20 and an energy cost of 80, which is really expensive, so we definitely want to get some energy recharge for our Sucrose. Next up is Catalyst Conversion. This is her first Ascension talent, and also a really good one. Every time Sucrose triggers a swirl reaction, which should be all the time, right? Even with her normal attacks, her skill, and her burst, anytime you trigger swirl, you will gain 50 elemental mastery for 8 seconds. Sucrose does not gain this elemental mastery, unfortunately, but your teammates do. So this is a really nice buff to your entire team. Next up is Mollis Favonius, and this makes it so that when either your skill or your burst hit an opponent, all of your party members will get another elemental mastery increase, this time by 20% of Sucrose's elemental mastery for 8 seconds. So this is why you definitely want to build as much elemental mastery as you can on your Sucrose, because she shares 20% of it with her team. So depending on what team she's on, whether it's Hyper Bloom, Virgin, Vaporize, Electro Charged, things like that, you will get a nice damage boost when Sucrose is on the team. Last but not least is a stable invention, and this makes it so you have a 10% chance to double the product when you craft weapon enhancement materials and character ones as well. So very, very nice. Next up are weapon options for Sucrose, and honestly this one is really, really easy to do because Sucrose can work really well with a lot of 4-star and 3-star options. And the first one being the Sacrificial Fragments, simply because this gives you a ton of elemental mastery as a substat. Mine's not even level 90. You should probably get yours to level 90, unlike me. And it lets you use your elemental skill a second time with an 80% chance. At Refinement 5, that is. But still, it's pretty consistent. And with her skill cooldown being 15 seconds, this is a really nice weapon to use. Gives you a bunch of extra energy for your Sucrose so that she can use her burst more often. Another 4-star option you can give her is the Favonius Codex. This is going to sacrifice some of her buff material in exchange for energy recharge as a substat. And in order to trigger this weapon's effect a little bit more consistently, you need to build some crit rate on your Sucrose so that you can get the extra energy particles that this weapon provides. If you're looking for 3-star options for Sucrose, one of the best support weapons is a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. You don't technically have to level this weapon, it just gives you HP percentage as a substat, which I guess is okay for Sucrose's survivability, but she doesn't have that much on-field time depending on the team she's on. But regardless, the Dragon Slayer's weapon does give the next character you swap to a whopping 48% attack boost. This is at Refinement 5 once again. So this is really nice for Vaporize teams, Melt teams, things like that, where getting a attack percentage boost actually helps improve your elemental reaction damage. Obviously, you wouldn't use this on something like a Hyper Bloom team where only EM matters. Another 3-star weapon that's also good for Sucrose is a Magic Guide, because this straight up gives you some elemental mastery as well. Make sure you level it, unlike me. And it also increases damage that opponents take by Hydro and Electro, so if you are using her in a Electro Charge team, this is perfect for you. But another 4-star weapon that you can give Sucrose, which I currently don't have because I'm terrible, I guess, is a Hakushin Ring. The Hakushin Ring is great for Electro Charge teams as well. You can craft this weapon in Inazuma, I believe. That's pretty much all I would recommend that weapon for, is Electro Charge teams. If you're using it in other stuff, then you're probably better off using Sacrificial Fragments or the Favonius Codex. And lastly, if you're just curious to know what's like the best of the best weapon you can give Sucrose, and you want to know some 5-star options, it's gonna be Nahida's signature weapon. It's called 1,000 Floating Dreams, and I recommend this weapon only if you're a whale or just happen to have this weapon for some reason. But it does provide you a ton of extra elemental mastery via the substats, and then the long effect here is that it straight up gives you even more elemental mastery, as well as extra elemental damage bonus depending on who's the team. And even you can even see at the bottom here, even more elemental mastery. You can pause the video if you want to read the full effect yourself, but I'm just giving you the gist of it. Next up, let's talk artifacts for Sucrose. This one is also pretty straightforward. She is a utility support, and one of the best utility support sets in the game, especially for animal characters, is a Viridescent Veneer. Why? It increases your swirl damage, but that's not the important part. The important part is that it decreases the elemental resistance of the element that gets swirled by 40%. So if you swirl with Pyro, that's minus 40 Pyro resistance on your enemies. Hydro, then minus 40 Hydro, and so on and so on. Remember that you can only swirl with Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro, not Dendro or Geo. If you are looking for other artifact sets for your Sucrose, you can give her an Instructor's set. The 4-piece effect of the instructors just gives everyone on your team more elemental mastery. Regardless of what you choose, let's talk about what you're looking for when it comes to the substats, and hopefully you can do better than me because mine are awful. I'm gonna be honest with you. I farmed the Viridescent Veneer set for so many characters, as you can see on the left here: Lynette, Kazuha, Heizo, Jean, Sayu, Venti, and Sucrose, of course. So there's a lot of Viridescent Veneer artifacts going around on my account here. My Sucrose got the short end of the stick when it came to her own substats. Anyways, substats that you're looking for are going to be, of course, first and foremost, elemental mastery. We want to get as much of that as we can. Second, you're going to want to get energy recharge as much as you can. Don't forget that she has an 80 cost burst, which is very, very expensive. So we want to get as much energy recharge to get consistent burst uptime. Once you have both of those substats on your artifacts, well, the rest is whatever you want it to be. You can go for like defense or HP just for more survivability on Sucrose, if she's going to be having more field time, or you can just go for more offensive stats like attack percentage, crit rate, crit damage. You might need a little bit more crit rate as a higher priority if you went Favonia's Codex, but honestly, the rest of the substats are up to your choosing. Now, when it comes to the main stats of the Sands, Goblet, and Circlet, we're looking for mainly elemental mastery on all of them, to be honest. For the Sands, though, if you are struggling to get some energy recharge for Sucrose, you can get a main stat energy recharge Sands. But for the Goblet and the Circlet, just elemental mastery. She does not need the Animo damage bonus here for Goblet, and Circlet, you don't need crit damage or crit rate. You can get enough from your substats, but I guess if you're really, really unlucky, maybe a crit rate Circlet main stat for Favonia's Codex users only, but that's it. Now, next up is her Constellations, which are actually really good. Now, mine is C6 because Sucrose is one of the first characters that was introduced in Genshin, and she's been on a ton of banners, so my Sucrose is technically C40 at this point. But let's go over what her Constellations do. So her C1 being already a great addition to her kit, it allows you to use her elemental skill an additional time. So she has 2 charges of her elemental skill. It's basically like having a free sacrificial fragments effect on your Sucrose, but if you were using it in addition to this Constellation, you get to use her skill 3 times, which is a ton of energy particles. C2 is going to increase the duration of her elemental burst by 2 seconds, which is great. C3 and C5 are going to increase her skill and burst, which is not really important, but I suppose it's nice to have additional damage increase. C4 is going to make it so that your normal and charge attacks can reduce your elemental skill cooldown by 1 to 7 seconds, and this is dependent on how many enemies you hit with her normal or charge attacks. So if you do a nice big AoE charge attack in front of a group of enemies, you can expect to reduce the cooldown by a chunk, which is actually really, really nice. C6 is going to make it so that your elemental burst, the element that it absorbs, is going to also give you a 20% elemental damage bonus. So if it absorbs fire or pyro, for example, then you get a 20% pyro damage bonus, and this is really, really nice. So let's talk team comps for Sucrose. And honestly, there's a ton. There is a ton of teams you can use Sucrose on. I'm not even joking. And I'm not exaggerating either. There's a lot of teams Sucrose can be put in and add absolutely insane value to all of them. So here is a very basic example of a Tartaglia, excuse me. Basically, Sucrose is in this team to swirl off the Pyro and even the Hydro. You know, your Vaporizes are basically just going to do more damage, and she's going to conveniently group up most smaller enemies for you, so that your Tartaglia can get the most out of his Riptide when you do his charge attacks. Really, really straightforward team here and really, really strong. Now, here's another variant of the international team with Sucrose. This works just as well. Again, Sucrose grouping up your enemies and swirling them to decrease the resistance thanks to Viridescent Veneer, and making your Zhongling's Pyronado do as much damage to as many enemies as possible. Alright, this would be an example of a electrocharge team. You don't have to use the same characters you see here, but you could also, instead of Barbara, you could use Kokomi or a different Hydro character, honestly, if you're choosing. Could also be Tartaglia, as we had earlier. The strat of this team is to have Fischl and Beto provide their off-field electro application, and Barbara is here to provide the Hydro application. And you can also use Sucrose here to, again, swirl all that damage and group up your enemies, so the electro charge is just bouncing in between all of them. And that's pretty much it. Like, electro charge teams, Sucrose can work in them. Another example of a vaporized team you can use with Sucrose here. Bennett to provide healing and buffs, and you can use Sucrose to swirl off of that. And then Jingcho to provide his Hydro application, and then of course Dulup being our on-field DPS character, and he does all this damage, big numbers popping up because of both Bennett's buffs as well as Sucrose debuffs on your opponents, and it should be for a really, really good and solid team. Alright, now I wanted to try something a little bit more banner friendly, I guess, because since, you know, Ayaka is also on this banner and so is Candace, you can also use Sucrose in a freeze team, although you want to make sure she swirls with the cryo, right, so that Ayaka can get the bonus damage from the Iridescent Veneer. But you should also keep in mind that elemental mastery buffs in a team like this mean absolutely nothing, because freeze doesn't do damage. It doesn't scale off elemental mastery. You know, it's not going to last long. The freeze isn't going to last longer because of EM or anything like that. But it is good, again, for grouping, so that Ayaka can get a really good elemental skill and burst damage value. Candace is here to apply her Hydro application. Diona is also here to provide energy to Ayaka and be your healer and shielder in a team like this. So as you can see, Sucrose has a lot of team options. I just showed you just a small portion of them here. I'm sure there's plenty more teams that some others in the comments will also share if they want to, because there's definitely a lot of them. And finally, we are at the end of the guide where I share my 2 cents on the character. And if you couldn't tell, this character is honestly amazing, especially if you're new. She's one of those characters that I recommend you always build, because we don't know when Kazuha is coming back. We don't know when Venti's coming back in the banner. And, you know, not everyone can take advantage of Faruzan or has Haizo either. And she's just one of those characters that, again, very strong in multiple teams and very much worth building. She's also really easy to build. Easy, but also, you know, the RNG can be really annoying at times, because getting Elemental Mastery as a main stat on Sands, Goblet, and Circlet can be really annoying. Trust me, I know. I've been there. I've had to endure it a lot of times, and sometimes you just kind of give up on it after a while in order to build other characters and stuff like that. But trust me, it's worth it. Sucrose is worth it. Especially, again, if you're a new character, the power of grouping up enemies together provides so much value to your teams. And if you are trying to, you know, get a good time in the Spiral Abyss, the time she saves you by grouping up your enemies together is huge. Absolutely huge. Now, the only thing that I find annoying with her kit is, again, the auto-targeting. So when you're facing a group of enemies and you use her skill and her burst, you know, sometimes Sucrose will just yeet it out in a direction that you weren't facing, or you didn't think she was going to throw it that way, and she just ends up, you know, just totally using it in a weird spot or a non-optimal spot. Maybe she doesn't get every enemy with her skill or her burst, and it's really unfortunate when that happens, but you know, it is one of her few downsides, I suppose. But yeah, you should also be seeing some Spiral Abyss footage using Sucrose. You can use her. I believe I'm using her in a Hyper Bloom team. I'm not sure, actually, because I actually record the Spiral Abyss footage after I'm done recording the guide portion of the video. So whatever team I'm using her on, I'm sure it's going great, and she's providing her, you know, her buffs to the team. Again, that's what she is. She's a utility support for your team. So in teams like Hyper Bloom or even Burgeon, you know, just getting a bunch of free elemental mastery, you know, she can provide a huge amount of elemental mashing because that 20%, you know, usually Sucrose builds, especially the optimized ones, I would say it's not unreasonable to have something like, you know, like 600 to 800 EM, depending on your stats, on your artifacts, and your weapon. But you can definitely have way more than that. And, you know, if you do, then, you know, 20% of that to your hyper bloom damage is going to be an insane buff. Now, she can mess up your elemental reactions a little bit because she might swirl with the Hydro on your team or Kuki Shinobu's Electro, but it's not a big deal because characters like Jin Cho and Kuki in this case just provide so much elemental application that it's not a big, again, it's not a big deal. And increasing the level of your skill and burst does not increase the swirl damage that they do. Someone might have to correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure the swirl damage is based solely off EM. You know, it's okay if you want to min-max your Sucrose and you just want to level her up because, you know, you want to do as much damage as possible, or you just really like the character, and that is totally fine. I think that's going to be a wrap for this guide. It's pretty short because, again, I feel like Sucrose is just a very simple and easy to build character, and that's not a bad thing. I don't mean to say that as a bad thing, or hopefully it doesn't come off as a negative thing about Sucrose. It's actually a really good thing and makes her very new player friendly and easy to get up and running and just provides so much value. And remember that you can only have one Kazuha on your team. So even if you do end up, you know, upgrading, so to speak, to a Kazuha or to a Venti later on in your Genshin career, remember that Spiral Abyss, you know, you need two teams. So if you want to have two Animo utility supports, you can split them and have Sucrose be on the other team that Kazuha isn't on. So she's always worth building. And that's going to be a wrap for my video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and or subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Also, Happy New Year if you're watching this in, you know, 2024, which I'm sure most of you are. And I'll see you guys in the next video.